Hi again then guys, and so we've got another PP specific circuit setup for you today, and in this particular setup we're going for a car which isn't necessarily for a specific event or race, but can be used when you need a small, fast, through corners, particularly, sports car for seasonal events in particular. There are quite a few 500 PP seasonal events, be it time trials, races, etc. And this car is a very good model to go for. The Suzuki GSX-R4 is also very good, but this car I would say is slightly easier for less experienced drivers to master. The handling is a bit more forgiving. So, in seasonal events you don't usually get to use really good tyres, so I've gone for sports hards on this to see how it would accurately feel with lesser tyres, because obviously with better tyres it will only be better. For the suspension, we've got the ride height on 70, front and rear, racing brakes as well of course. The springs have increased to 425 and 575, the dampers to 4. We've left the anti-roll on 3. To be honest, you can lower that down to 2 or even 1 if you feel that you need to. Neutral camber and tow. We'll come back to the gearbox last. You want your clutch and flywheel. For the diff, I've got the lowest initial torque, and I would recommend playing around with these settings to find what works best for you personally. I personally like my vehicles to have more heavy handling rather than loose, so I've got the initial torque as low as possible, and then the acceleration and braking on 50. If you take it higher, say 60 front and rear, then it will be even stiffer around corners, and if you take it a little bit lower, obviously the opposite. So as I said, just work out what works best for you personally. As far as power, we've got no power upgrades, but we do have an oil change, so we're running 174 horsepower, and in order to get us down to 500 pp, you do need quite a lot of ballast, 191 kilos, and I would recommend putting that 10% towards the front of the car, which gives you the same weight distribution as a Le Mans prototype of 4951. And finally, for the gearbox, I would recommend going for a slightly closer ratio gearbox, because although it doesn't have a huge amount of power, it still has decent straight line performance, but at the same time it's obviously not a top speed tune. So I've gone for an auto setting of 149, then for the individual gears 3.2, 2.1, 1550, 1.2 and 975, with a final drive of 5.4. So obviously you could lower that and raise it as necessary if you need a little bit of extra top speed or draft potential, or the opposite if you don't, of course. So that's it overall for the mechanical setup, and there are quite a few points of variation that you can adjust depending on what you need the car to be good for. So now let's take it out to a typical seasonal event track to see how it performs. So we quite often have seasonal events based around tracks like, or sometimes specifically, the Tsukuba circuit. Many of the tracks used in, say, 450 or 500 pp seasonal events tend to be tracks which are more technical, more handling based tracks rather than straight line tracks. And on that kind of circuit, something like a Rocket or a GSX-R4 will really come in handy. How does this car perform here then? Well, it actually performs really well. 500 pp is of course quite high, but there aren't that many vehicles which can match this car's cornering ability at any pp. So this car can get around this track with sports hards and me driving of course. I use an automatic gearbox and I'm far from being the fastest of drivers, but I can get this car around in under a minute. So considering that that has sports hards, if you put better tyres on, obviously you'll go even quicker, and with a better driver, who knows how fast you could be, probably down to say 55, maybe even 53 seconds. So in seasonal events, on certain tracks, not necessarily all, but on certain tracks, this is definitely a weapon to have at your disposal. So if you do decide to use this 500 pp tune, obviously I hope you find it competitive for whatever purpose you need it for. And that's it overall for this build, so if you'd like to keep up with other PP specific builds like this in the future, be sure to hit subscribe down below for those. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.